Picture a city of pyramids with no weapons anywhere in it. No swords, no walls, no burned buildings, no skeletons with battle wounds. Nothing. And yet thousands of people still bowed to a ruler there, 500 years before Egypt had a single pharaoh. Now picture the opposite, an empire where the ruler didn't just claim to be blessed by the sun. He claimed to be its son, biologically, and where citizens paid their taxes not in coins, but in weeks of their own labor, handed straight to a man they believed was a living god. 2 continents, 0 contact between them and the old world. Nobody in the Americas ever saw a Mesopotamian throne or a Sumerian king list. And yet, completely on their own, they built kings too. Sometimes through belief, sometimes through blood, sometimes through pure conquest. Here's the question I want you sitting with for the next few minutes. If humans on opposite sides of the planet, who never once compared notes, both end up kneeling to one person, is that culture? Or is that just what happens to us, biologically, once enough of us live in one place for long enough? Let's find out, starting with the city that somehow built an empire without ever picking up a weapon. Every civilization we're about to look at had to solve the exact same problem. How do you get thousands of strangers to obey one person? Watch how differently each one answers it. First stop, the desert coast of Peru, in a valley called Supe, around 3000 BCE, while Egypt was still centuries from its first pyramid. A city called Caral is already standing there. 6 earthen pyramids, sunken circular plazas built for gathering. Thousands of residents. This is the oldest known city in the entire Western Hemisphere. Archaeologists have spent decades digging through it looking for the usual evidence of power, and they keep coming up empty. No weapons, no defensive walls, no burned buildings, no skeletons with battle wounds. While early cities everywhere else on Earth were bracing for attack, Caral wasn't bracing for anything. So how do you get people to move earth, haul stone, and build monuments to a handful of leaders without ever pointing a weapon at them? Caral's answer, as far as researchers can tell, was trade and ritual. The city sat at the center of an exchange network running from the Pacific coast into the Amazon, and whoever controlled the ceremonies, the calendar, and the sacred plazas controlled the city. Nobody had to be threatened. They just had to believe the rituals mattered. Caral built obedience out of belief before anyone else on the continent built it out of blood. Push that idea north a few centuries into the swampy lowlands of what's now southern Mexico. Olmec territory, often called the mother culture of everything that follows in Mesoamerica. The Olmec didn't just believe in powerful leaders. They carved them in stone, permanently. Colossal heads, some over 9 feet tall, each one showing the individual, unmistakable face of a specific ruler. Not a generic king, a person. Someone hundreds of workers dragged multi-ton basalt through jungle terrain to immortalize, with no wheels and no draft animals, just raw, coordinated human effort. Ask yourself what it actually takes to get hundreds of people to spend months moving a boulder for one man's face. That's not casual respect. That's obedience with a name attached to it. And it's the template the rest of Mesoamerica was about to inherit. Because the Maya took that template and did something the Olmec never quite did. They made their rulers not just powerful, but sacred. Their word for it was Kuhul Ajau, Holy Lord. And that title wasn't decoration. A Maya king's most important job wasn't running a government. It was ritual bloodletting, piercing his own body in agonizing public ceremonies believed to tear open a doorway between the human world and the world of gods and ancestors. When he took the throne, texts describe the exact moment he received the Kawil scepter, carved in the shape of a lightning god, as the instant he officially stopped being fully human. Stone monuments went up across the cities recording his bloodline, his battles, and his conversations with the supernatural in permanent public stone. But here's the catch: nobody tells you about divine kingship. It cuts both ways. If the rains failed, or the harvest failed, or the king lost a battle, people didn't shrug it off as bad luck. They read it as a king who had lost the god's favor. Claim to be sacred, and your failures stop being political. They become cosmic. Now jump forward again to the lake city of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, and at its peak, one of the largest cities anywhere on Earth. Their ruler carried a title that almost sounds modest. Tlatoani, he who speaks. Don't let that fool you. This was the commander of the army, the highest judge, the chief priest, and the man who decided which neighboring city got conquered next. Where Caral ran on belief, and the Maya ran on sacred ritual, the Aztecs ran their kingship on something much blunter: conquest and tribute. Cities that lost to them didn't just bow, they paid permanently. A river of wealth flowing into Tenochtitlan on a fixed schedule, extracted from people who had no say in the matter. The most dominant rulers eventually took the title Huey Tlatoani, great speaker, essentially emperor, and they backed the whole whole system with a story that made conquest sound less like greed and more like duty. Their god Huitzilopochtli, they believed, required blood to keep the sun rising every single day. Try arguing with a government that claims it's personally responsible for sunrise. Into the mountains. The Inca, who built the largest empire the Americas had ever seen, one that stretched along the Andes for roughly 2,500 miles. Their ruler wasn't just called king. He was Intip-Churin, son of the sun, not blessed by the sun, not favored by the sun, but descended from it by blood through a line traced back to the legendary Manco Capac. His clothing shimmered with gold, considered literally the sweat of the sun god Inti. Foreign ambassadors who met him didn't believe they were meeting a politician. They believed they were standing in front of a living deity. And here's the strangest part of the whole Inca system. There was almost no money and no real marketplaces. Instead of taxing people in coins, the Sapa Inca taxed them in time through a labor system called the mita, where ordinary citizens owed the state several weeks of physical work every year, building roads, terraces, temples, and storehouses. Millions of people had their labor legally and religiously owed to one man, because as far as they were concerned, that man was the son of the sun itself. Four different civilizations, four completely different tools: trade, stone monuments, tribute, obligated labor, and every single one arrived at the same place. One person at the center of everything, treated as something more than human. So go back to that question from the start. 2 continents, 0 contact. Nobody in Peru ever heard of Sumer, and nobody in Mexico ever saw a Mesopotamian throne. And yet, independently, using completely different tools, ceremony in one place, sacred blood in another, conquest and tribute somewhere else, obligated labor somewhere further still, humans kept building the exact same thing. One person, treated as something more than a person, at the center of everyone else's lives. That's not really a coincidence of culture. That's a pattern, and patterns that repeat themselves independently on opposite sides of a planet with 0 communication between them usually aren't telling you a story about those people. They're telling you a story about this species. Think about what that actually means. Caral didn't copy Uruk. The Maya didn't study Egypt. The Inca never heard a single word about a pharaoh, and the Aztecs never read a Sumerian king list. Every one of these civilizations solved the exact same problem completely alone, with no answer key to work from. And every single one landed on a version of the same solution. That's not culture spreading. That's something underneath culture, showing up again and again because it was already built into the people doing the building. And it didn't stop at kings either. Once one civilization figured out that obedience could be organized around a single sacred figure, that idea didn't need to travel to repeat itself. It just needed people, anywhere, in any century, running into the same problem. Too many strangers, too many decisions, not enough time to argue every single one of them out. Hand that problem to any sufficiently large group of humans, apparently, and they'll eventually hand it back to you wearing a crown. We don't kneel to kings anymore, but we still hand out that same near-sacred trust to presidents, to CEOs, to institutions we'll never meet in person and mostly never question. We still get uneasy disagreeing with someone once enough other people are agreeing with them. We still, on some quiet, instinctive level, want somebody standing at the center of the story, holding it all together. Same ancient wiring, different outfit. The pyramid with no weapons is gone. The son of the sun is gone. But the impulse that built them both is still sitting right behind your own eyes.